I intentionally brought this big wooden cross with me into the studio today to make a point. I heard Alistair Begg a while back on the radio. He's a Scottish preacher who ministers in Cleveland, Ohio now, a tremendous teacher. But he talked about visiting a church on Sunday morning. He was traveling and he visited a church, and the worship leader started off the service by asking everybody, "How do you all feel this morning?" So here's how Alistair responded. Well, maybe not out loud, but at least in his mind, he said this: "If I told you how I feel, especially in light of the last 5 minutes, you would question whether I was even a Christian at all. Goodness, at 8:30 on a Sunday morning, I'm barely ambulatory. I can't start there. And you want me to say that? I just kicked the dog. I don't even have a dog. I got in an argument with someone because they took my parking space. I spilled my coffee. I didn't read my Bible. I'm a miserable wretch. And now you want me to start here? How do you feel? I feel rotten. That's how I feel." That's why you have to get yourself under the control of the Scriptures. That's why it is what we know, the verities of the Scriptures, which fuel our hearts and our emotions and lead us on. Hence, praise my soul, the King of heaven, to his feet thy tribute bring, ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven, who like thee his praise shall sing. Okay, now we've got something to sing about, for we've been reminded of truth. You have been ransomed, you have been healed, you have been restored, you have been forgiven. You're looking away from yourself now, you're looking out into Christ, and it is in this that we have something that fuels our praise. I love that concept, because he's exactly right. All too often, people come into our services feeling beaten down and just beat up from the week that they just had. And we start off with something like, "How do you feel?" Well, I feel rotten. That's how I feel. I mean, often people won't say that, but on the inside, that's what's going on. They're struggling. And so what we need to do is exactly what Alistair said, remind them of truth. That is why I almost always start off a time of worship in a service with at least a brief understanding, at least a brief presentation of the gospel, of talking about what it was that Jesus did on the cross for you and me, what it is that makes us even able to come before God and worship Him. Without the cross, we've got nothing. Scripture is very clear that it's through Jesus that we offer our sacrifices of praise. It is not because of our own merit. We can't come on that. But when we begin to recognize there is a God in heaven who sent His Son to die on the cross, that we might know life and know life eternal, that we have been redeemed, we've been reconciled to the Father, all of a sudden there's something on the inside of us that goes, "I want to worship God because of what He's done for me." And so that's kind of my standard, my go-to, if you will. When I'm starting off a time of worship, I almost always will begin someplace like that. A lot of times I'll start with a song that talks about the cross and what it means for us. And if I'm not starting with a song like that, then I'm going to at least talk about the idea before we launch into the first song. I want to make sure that we're putting aside all of that crud from the week. I want to get rid of all of that stuff that so easily grabs onto us, and instead point people to the cross, to the recognition that we are redeemed because of what Jesus did, and therefore we can come boldly before the throne of God. When you do that, it changes people's perspective and it causes them to be more willing to worship. I want to challenge you today to think about that. Don't just jump in and think everybody might be with you. No, I always assume that people aren't. I make the assumption that most people coming into a church service on Sunday morning or whenever it is are not really ready. They just had a fight on the way to the service or whatever with their spouse. I've been there. I know how this works. And so I want to make sure that I'm pointing people to the cross, to the recognition of what Jesus did so that we can be reconciled to the Father. And when we do that, then it changes their perspective and causes them to be more willing to worship. So I want to challenge you to think about that. Again, don't just launch into your time of worship. Point people to the sacrifice that Jesus made for them and cause them to recognize anew and afresh there in that time that it's because of that we can come before the Father.
brought to you by myworshipleadingcoach.com.
Helping you to be more fully equipped as a worship leader.